Good afternoon. Today I want to talk about our psalm for Easter. And this Sunday we will be using Psalm 118, about 13 verses of Psalm 118, which is found on page 760 in the Book of Common Prayer. And I doubt if any of us would have gone, oh yeah, that's a psalm I recognize. It's not one like the 23rd Psalm or the 121st Psalm or Psalm 1 that we use often during the church year in worship services, but yet you know this psalm better than you realize because you'll hear some of the verses, you'll read many of the verses, and you'll say, so that's where that comes from. Now, we won't read all 29 verses of the psalm this Sunday, but I hope that you'll take some time to do that because you'll find a number of wonderful themes all through the psalm that tie into Easter. This is actually a hymn that was probably part of a worship service of thanksgiving offered in the temple. It has parts for a celebrant. There's parts for an unnamed person in the psalm who becomes kind of our leading character. And then there are parts for the congregation. So everyone's participating in this psalm. It's definitely a good Episcopal psalm. The first two verses that we'll hear this Sunday on Easter are verses 1 and 2, and they're part of actually a 4-verse opening refrain to a hymn. And everyone is singing of the goodness of the Lord, His mercy endures forever. It's giving thanks for all that God does for us. And then we move into this part where an unnamed person is in distress. We don't know what the distress is, but if we read the entire psalm, it becomes pretty clear he may be involved in a battle somewhere as part of a war, and we know that was a pretty important part of Israel's history. They seem to always be at war with someone. Someone seemed to always be invading, but in this particular psalm, our main character is surrounded by his enemies, and he's calling upon the Lord for deliverance. And throughout the first several verses of the next section of the psalm, the person talks about the Lord as his salvation, that the Lord has triumphed, has exalted. The Lord is clearly the victor in this struggle, for he has delivered his servant. And then we move into a section where everybody gets to participate in the psalm. And it's probably one of those that's like a versicle in response that we see in morning prayer or evening prayer, in the suffrages where a leader says a line and then the congregation responds. And here's where we find so many of these verses that we know from other parts of our liturgy and the scriptures. Verse 22, this same stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. That's from the gospel. That's later used in the Gospel of Mark. Then verse 23, the leader would say, this is the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes, would be the response from the congregation. And then the final verse that we'll read on Easter Sunday morning is, on this day the Lord has acted, and the congregation would respond, we will rejoice and be glad in it. And that's certainly one that we hear during the Easter themes and throughout the church year. I encourage you, like I said, to read the rest of the psalm, all 29 verses. Verses 25 through 29, which we won't read on Easter, contains more of these verses that you have heard before. And toward the end, I believe it's on verse 26, our main character is identified as the one who comes in the name of the Lord. And of course, Jesus is so often identified in the New Testament as the Messiah, the one who comes in the name of the Lord. So you can see this is a wonderful psalm for Easter Sunday, and I hope that you'll take the opportunity to read all 29 verses of it. Tomorrow we'll talk about our reading from the book of Acts, and so I hope you have a wonderful afternoon.